Hi, welcome to the bathtub. This is Scott Bradfield in the bathtub, and the metaphorical bathtub of our imaginations. And this is the special 500 plus viewers edition of the bathtub. As one of our stalwart viewers in Northern Ireland, Andy, noted for me earlier this week, we broke 500 in viewers subscriptions or so. That's like us, and then Donald Trump. Like Donald Trump, then we are next in terms of viewers out on YouTube and we don't Twitter. I still don't know how to Twitter. But in YouTube we're right next to Donald Trump in terms of viewers. This week I wanted to I was I look on Facebook and keep in touch with people, and one of my old students and friends and a good writer, Dan Waters out in the East Coast, was talking about he was doing a little thing on what his monthly reads are, which is kind of fun to see what people are reading. And he mentioned that he'd just been reading lots of old, they call them graphic novels, comic book anthologies. And he had these big compendiums he was buying, which I've had some of them. They're very hard to read because they're so big. And it made me realize that we haven't read any comic books in the bathtub, which is very misleading since I grew up reading comic books. I read far too many comic books. I read a lot in college, and I've written about comics occasionally. I still think they should be called comic books. I'm an old fart. And when I see graphic novel, I think there are seriously graphic novels. But then if you take 50 Batman comics and you put them in a big giant book, that's not a graphic novel. It's a bunch of comic books. And I thought I'd bring one of the comic books I wrote about. I thought I'd post this down below because it's a piece I'm really proud of about Jack Kirby. Like a lot of people in my generation, I was really raised reading Jack Kirby. I was reading like junky science fiction, thrillers, detective books, comic books, and literature books. And I didn't know the difference between any of them. I just, whatever ones were, I knew it was okay to read some of them, but the rest of them I should be a little embarrassed about. Jack Kirby is, well, most of us know him from the amazing work he did with Stan Lee when he did the Fantastic Four and all that stuff. From my childhood, I'll be running down to get the latest episode of Fantastic Four, which was visually and narratively so interesting. And he had this great, I think a lot of his early stuff is kind of boring now in retrospect, but that one period through the 60s and 70s where he was just brilliant. And then he went off to DC. And when I was in college, I wasn't really reading comics that much, but I had friends who read them. And he went to DC and he started something called the Fourth World Omnibus. The Fourth World Comics. This is a collection, a series of omnibuses that come out in 2000s, 2007. This one comes out. The comics themselves were coming out in the 70s. And they included things like the Forever People, the New Gods, and when he went to DC, he asked them to supposedly, according to Mark Evanier, I'm saying his name, Mark Evanier, who does some really great introductions of this. He also wrote a great history of Jack Kirby and Stan Lee, the title of which I can't remember at the moment. A very good historian of the comic books, Mark Evanier. And he says how when Kirby went to DC, he said, "What's your least successful title?" And they said Jimmy Olsen, Superman's best friend, Jimmy Olsen, a comic I used to love when I was 6 years old, by the way. And he took over Jimmy Olsen and just wrote the comics. He was not a writer, but he wrote and drew just these amazing comics. They make almost no sense. I've read some of them too. I read through the entire sequence of the Fourth World Omnibuses. They also included Mr. Miracle. So those Jimmy Olsen, New Gods, Forever People, and Mr. Miracle, the super escape artist. And his super escape artist is usually he's got something in his boots that blows everything up. He's the most phony escape artist I've ever seen. Basically, he just has like all sorts of, it's like if Houdini had like a laser pistol or something. It doesn't really count if you have laser pistol. But he has super laser pistols all over his body. And so even when you put him on a rocket ship and blast him in outer space, he always escapes. But in the background of these different comics is this intergalactic battle between, and please don't write, I know I'm getting this wrong, between two different worlds, and Earth's in the between them. One's called Apocalypse, and that's run over by this guy Darkseid. The most uninteresting character, by the way, in the series. I don't know why. He Darkseid. According to Mark Evanier in his book, Kirby was very upset that he felt that Darth Vader. This is how far back we're going. Darth Vader was actually stolen from his visuals. His visuals for what's his name? Darkseid and Doctor Doom. We also created Doctor Doom. Okay, I'm sorry, I'm sort of rambling, but it's impossible to talk about these without rambling. What's great about them is just the visualizations. Every single episode is filled with these great, big, wide paneled shots. He does lots of 2-page shots, lots of intergalactic. This guy. He's the Silver. Kirby started the Silver Surfer. He created the Silver Surfer, and then he went to DC. So he said, while I left that guy behind, I'm going to create a silver. He's on skis, and he does sort of the Silver Surfer. Only he's on skis, and he's a black cop, I think, who's been shot. Kirby created some of the first black superheroes, by the way. He created Black Panther, and this is one of the many characters he creates for this series. And I don't even remember him. There's so many characters coming in and out of the fourth world comics that it's hard to keep track of. And basically, he's in a coma or something. He's paralyzed in bed, and for some reason he turns into this speed racer, a super speed racer, and he goes out. I don't remember what he does. And I just finished reading these again. So he starts off with these 4 different comics. He tries to create a whole new universe of characters, and he's continually inventive. And it's almost every second page he comes up with another crazy idea, and it's hard to keep track of them all. Now, when you're reading them, I have to say, my first instinct is to think that Kirby was kind of a terrible writer. And I remember when these were coming out, I used to read these with a couple of friends, and once in a while we'd read them. And we'd say, "Guys, writing's really terrible." He's not really a bad writer. He's actually kind of funny. He's just coming up with so many different crazy ideas. He can't keep track of them. And so he'll come up with ideas like the Speed Racer guy, and he'll leave him for months and years. You won't even remember he's around. And so he did these comics. As he did these comics, it was a really bad time for comics. I remember in college, I used to pick some of these up, and there was a lot of problems with prices of paper, and the comics were having trouble with their prices going up, and a lot of comics were crashing. And Kirby's series all slowly died to death. So Jimmy Olsen went out, and then Forever People died, and he stopped running them. And as those were going, he created some new characters, which are quite fun. I picked up a lot of these a while back. The Demon, which many people know, and he started Commandy. So I think this was the one successful comic he did. It's basically Planet of the Apes, where all the creatures, like there's lions and tigers and elephants, and they've all become civilized or whatever, and like the apes. And Commandy's like the only kind of, he looks like Thor as a young boy, and he's running around in this kind of zoo of all these animals who are smarter, who have a bigger civilization than he does. So, but before Command and all those come along, Kirby does these. They're in these 4 volumes. I picked them up in these early volumes, and they recently. I did a piece which I'm going to post below when the volumes were all put together in one of these big omnibuses. They're really hard to read in these big omnibus editions. You really don't know have anywhere to rest them. You can't. One of the reasons I didn't do comics and these types of books, you can't really take them into the bathtub because they're kind of expensive to get, and they're also they're you don't want to bang them up because they're kind of beautiful books. So they're not really for your bathtub. And the omnibus you can't literally take into the bathtub. It's physically bigger than some of your bathtubs. So these old editions are which kind of pricey, but they're kind of an easier way to read the old Fourth World omnibuses. Anyway, these are really great, relaxing ways of wasting time. They have no redeeming social value. I'm pretty sure they have no redeeming. I don't think you learn anything from these except to kind of relax and have a good time. This is Mr. Miracle, and he's got again, he's been chained onto something, and he's supposed to be impossible to break out, but of course he's got, He's got a laser pistol, so he just breaks out with a laser pistol. But the visuals are always amazing, and the invention, the continuous invention. So Kirby's whole series eventually dies the death. It's all the titles are canceled. And one of the saddest parts of Kirby's life, I think, was quite a happy man. He was very creative. Is near the end of his life, at DC gave him an opportunity to. He never was able to tie up all these stories that he created, and they gave him an opportunity with two different stories. One's called Dave. What is it? In volume 4 of this, there's about 60 or 80 pages of new material from the 80s in which he was going to rewrite and finish these stories, and they're terrible. So the last 100 pages of volume 4 are they're just I don't even know what's happening. I just read them again for the third. It's filled with his late work. He's an old man by this time, I guess, and it's just visually awful. Has none of the kind of energy of his early stuff. So anyway, it's there for the completists, and I had to read it. But it's really almost worth reading to see what a mess he leaves himself that he never finishes, because it's just a delightful series of books. Great waste of time. Okay, next week, I don't know, we'll find something we can actually literally take into the bathtub, and not these books. They're beautiful old books. Okay.